Let's talk about something that gets overlooked all the time when it comes to extensions, and that is the seam of the weft. Now, I feel like a lot of stylists, and I mean, probably clients as well, kind of get more so caught up in the grams than the actual seam. Like, well, this brand gives me 120 grams, it must be better than this brand that gives me 100 grams. But here's the truth, that the amount of grams does not tell the full story. The seam design, the length of the weft, the seam quality are actually what end up determining like how the hair wears, how it feels on the client. But here's the reality. Grams do not tell the full story. The seam design, the seam quality, the width of the seam itself are actually what determine like how the hair wears, how it feels on the client, and how easy it is for you to install. Obviously assuming that they're all good quality hair, because we know that matters. So like, let's break this down. Now here's why grams don't really tell the full story. Two wefts can weigh the exact same, 15 grams, but still be completely different. If you have, let's say 100 grams, just in general, but the seam is really thick, versus 100 grams that have been spread out evenly on a seam that's a little bit thinner, a little bit more compact, same weight, very, very different wearability, very different stitching. Grams do not necessarily account for bulk, distribution, or construction, because we also have to think about the width of the weft itself. A 10-inch weft that is 20 grams is not the same as an 11.5-inch weft that is 20 grams, right? We have to think about how much are you also going to be cutting off to fit on the client's head, because 11.5 inches is a pretty like wide weft. Now here's why the seam matters so much, because it's kind of like not a thickness versus comfort type thing, but comfort does play into it. If the seam on a hand-tied weft is very bulky, and I hate to say, think about like machine tied, but machine tied is thick. That is a thick seam, a very thick weft. That can be very uncomfortable for clients, especially those with fine hair, thinning hair, or even very like tender-headed and sensitive scalps, right? That's why hand-tied and genius wefts are so popular versus machine-tied, because machine-tied wefts, I mean, you really can't use those on everyone. That's a very small population you can use them on because they are so thick. And thicker seams like that can end up creating pressure points, especially with the stitching, depending the type of stitching you're doing, the type of string that you're using, and that can lead to soreness and headaches. Now, if you're using a seam like hand-tied or genius, where it's definitely thinner, it's a little bit more flexible, you can stack, you can do more with it, that does end up being more comfortable for clients. Because at the end of the day, comfort is one of the biggest factors when it comes to loyalty. You can do the best hair in the world, but if they are uncomfortable and they fucking hate it for 3 weeks, like that, they're not gonna come back forever. Now here's the deal. The seam design does truly matter, and even when it comes to matting, a poorly designed seam can either have the hair like literally kind of falling apart, especially if you cut it, it'll just go. But also we need to look at the mustache, the return hair that is on a hand-tied weft. All hand-tied wefts have return. Period, full stop. All hand-tied toppers have return. That is something very normal, but a very well-constructed weft, especially hand-tied, is not gonna have a very aggressive mustache or return. And when it looks very aggressive, guys, that is just harder to hide. And when those little mustache hairs, if the client isn't brushing well, or they're not like really taking care of their hair 10 out of 10, that can start matting right along the very top, and that's going to cause a problem. That can literally start to feel, I hate to say like a fucking brick, but that can start to feel like a brick at the very top of the seam. And I don't want to say that a thicker seam or a thicker weft like machine tied can slow down an install, but to be honest, my opinion is that it does. Because the wefts themselves are so heavy, you have to be sure that it is clipped properly, that you're using a really strong string, and then as you're going through and stitching, you are, I feel like, jigging and adjusting a little bit more than you would with like thinner wefts, do you know what I mean? And like I said, that can just cause irritation for a client, because you have to think about it. If using something like hand-tied or genius, right? Eventually, let's say the stitching, I personally do think it is easier than machine tied, because I feel like machine tied, you're like, holy shit, I gotta crank these stitches, and you really can't. There's only so much that you can do. If using something with a smaller, more compact seam ends up saving you, even if it's only 10 minutes per row or 15 minutes per an install, that's hours saved every single month. And y'all know we already don't have time to do everything that we need to do as stylists. Like, I'm gonna save the time where I can. Now, the reason that I prefer to use a thinner seam, Hand Tighter Genius, is because your clients truly do want the extensions to just like melt into their hair. They want it to disappear. They want to pretend like it's not there. And a thinner seam can really hug the head more, whether it's flipped up or down, and that does lead to a more natural result. Especially if you think about clients that maybe don't have a lot of density. If you are using a weft, because machine tied, guys, you can use one on a row, maybe two, maybe. They're that thick. There's no way that they can hide that, because even if it's sitting anywhere near up here where you really do need to have it in order to blend like the face framing pieces, you can't take it up that high because it's never going to be able to be hid with the amount of density a client has. That's why I just don't prefer something as thick and bulky like machine tied. Now, if you're unsure of how to actually like judge a seam quality, here's some things that you need to look for. Number one, does it bend easily? Does it feel stiff? Like what's going on with that? One thing that I always say about my hairline is I always say it's like a very structured seam. If I fold it and take pliers to it and clamp it to like mark it for where to cut or bend or whatever, it's gonna stay. That is a very well constructed seam. I don't actually want it to feel loosey-goosey, but that doesn't mean I want it to feel like a brick either. Do you know what I mean? There is that like happy medium. Then I would also take a look at, once again, the return in the mustache. If it is very, very aggressive, I probably wouldn't be using it on my clients. I would try to sandwich it in. So think like the mustache heavy side isn't laying against the client's scalp and it's not sitting on the very top where it can poke out. But then again, depending on how many wefts you're putting on their hair and how well they take care of it, that could eventually lead to matting. So I'm just not someone who is personally going to use a weft that has a thick, aggressive mustache. And then another thing, which is kind of like unfortunate because you're not really gonna know until you use the hairline, how does the seam hold up itself, right? You can't have too much hair on a weft. I know because I've done it. Like I own a hairline, I'm gonna tell y'all a story in a second, but I know it. Having too much hair on there will eventually make it start to poke out, but also how is it holding up? Does after the main install and then one refresh, are you already like, damn, that hair's starting to poke out, it's not really looking good? That's a problem. The seam should not be falling apart after 8 weeks or even after 4 months. These wefts should really be lasting close to a year. So here's the biggest mistake I made when I started my Hairline Morning Hair. The very first round of hair that I got, because you have to test this shit out for like a fucking year. It's crazy, right? I went through and I got 18 inch and the factory misunderstood because I said for 22 inch, I wanted 20 grams. For 18 inch, I wanted 15. Every weft came in 20 grams, including 18 inch. And at first I was like, wait, do I love this? I think I love this. Like there's so much hair on this weft. Yeah. No, that was a fucking mistake. Because my wefts are only 10 inches wide. Like if it had been 11 and a half inches, 20 grams, yeah, totally fine. Like not a big deal, but it's not, it's 10 inches and I do that on purpose so you don't have to cut a ton of hair off, right? No one likes that. So what happens is you guys have to think when hair gets wet, it swells. So now here, and remember what I also said, the seams on my hairline are very compact. I wanted them teeny tiny and like very structured, right? So now here, I'm getting all these wefts, we're trying it out, testing it obviously, because you have to do that. And as we're going through and getting them wet on clients, we're noticing like when we have clients coming back so we can like check it, that the seam seems to almost be like the hair's like raising up. And I'm sure you've seen that occasionally, and it happening here or there is fine, but it was happening a lot. And because of that, I was like, oh no, here's what happened. Because my wefts are only 10 inches wide and they're supposed to be 15 grams, now we have 5 more grams on it and my hair is double drawn. So it's heavy, right? All of the hair, when it was swelling, there literally wasn't enough space on that weft anymore, so it started popping up. So you can have wefts that have too many grams on them. Like we tested it, we did not like it. That hair did not make it through, and that's okay. Like we eventually fixed it, we got everything going and it was working fine. But that is something to just keep in mind, that more is not always necessarily better. So you need to remember that grams are truly only part of the equation. The seam thickness, the design, the flexibility, the mustache, the return, all of that also matter for comfort, longevity, and like the quality of your installs and what your clients actually need. Because clients might not notice the grams on the label, but as a stylist, you are the one that understands what will kind of like make or break an actual extension experience. And that's why I've spent so much time trying to create the flattest, most durable seams. Like, don't get me wrong, it would be really great for my clientele if my clients had to get new hair every 6 months. But you like, I would make so much money, but that doesn't feel good to me. I don't want my clients to feel like they're forced every 6 months to get a whole new batch of hair because it's falling apart on purpose. I would rather their hair last 12 months or even 18 months or whatever it is, last a year and a half, and then change it out because they need it or they want a longer length or they want a new color. That to me is the type of quality I want to provide for stylists and my clients. Which is why I say, guys, test it out, see what happens, ask questions, right? Any hair owner or hairline owner worth their weight in salt will be able to answer these questions. And if they can't, they should at least be able to find the answer. Do you know what I mean? So as I always say, if you have any questions, you can comment below. I am more than happy to help. You can also DM me on Instagram. I respond to all of my DMs as long as they're not weird. Don't be weird in my DMs. But hair and hair extensions, these are things that I could talk about, literally day in and day out. So thank you for being here, and ask away if you have any questions.